DJ PK, it's 97.5 The Zone. We're joined now by Alex Miller, Texas A&M beat writer for the Bryan-College Station Eagle. Alex, good morning.
Good morning to you, fellas. Thanks for having me on.
We love to do the spring football tour, kind of get a handle on where these programs are, although we realize things can change quickly in this era. In advance of the games next year, and Utah State is going to play Texas A&M. Game number 2. And as you prepare for this, I'm thinking, okay, how good is A&M? If I said right now A&M's going to win 8 games and go 4-4 in the SEC, judging by the last 20 years, I'd probably have a pretty good chance of being spot on. And worst case scenario, I'd miss by a game.
Yeah, no, I think that's if you're going to Vegas, that's a pretty good bet to take. And you know, A&M last year went 8-4, and that's probably about where they should have finished. I think what has made the offseason so infuriating for its fans is how they finished 8-4. They started 7-1. They had a big win over LSU. They go into November with a relatively advantageous schedule, lay a couple eggs against South Carolina and Auburn. Somehow they still have a chance to play for a spot in the SEC championship game against Texas, and then the offense lays the dud, and it was the first game you play your biggest rival in 12 years at your own place, and you can't get it done. A lot of angst at the end of the season, and you know, there's some hopes for cautious optimism around this A&M team, but yeah, I think that 8-4 right now is a fair bet with a ceiling of maybe 10-2 if everything goes right.
I love this era of college football, and you lose something, well, you just go out and get something else. You go get somebody else's team, somebody else's players, I should say. So they got 3 defensive linemen drafted in the first 2 rounds. That's very impressive. You think, oh, my gosh, what are they going to do? Well, what are they going to do? They get transfers from Florida, Pittsburgh, Iowa State, and Georgia. So they just immediately solve that, right? Just go get 4 upperclassmen, plug them in, and away you go. Is that the way you see it?
Yeah, you know, that's a great way to see it, and they're guys that they're going to have to depend on because, yes, you lose 3 NFL draft picks that, let's be honest, they did underwhelm last year. If you go back and look at the stats, those 3 guys did not live up to the expectations that many had hoped for them. Nick Scorton led the Big Ten in sacks the year before at Purdue and didn't come close to matching that. And, you know, one of the biggest knocks on Shamar Stewart going into the draft was his lack of production. The size and the measurables were there, but the lack of production wasn't. And so what A&M fans, I think, are really wanting to see this year are, can their defensive linemen, particularly their ends, finish sacks at the quarterback? And so you've got guys like Deion Hayes and Samuel Mpemba and TJ Searcy from Florida that they're going to be counting on. And well, they've also got a couple of homegrown guys. There's a guy named Cassius Howell that Utah State fans should probably keep an eye on when they come to College Station or are watching the game back from Utah. And those are some guys that I think, you know, they've had. You look at their tape, you look at their numbers. They've had some moments, but this will probably be the biggest opportunity for them to jump into a starting main rotation guy role this season. And A&M's going to need some good stuff for them this season.
So you mentioned Howell. He was 6th on the team in tackles last year. The top 6 are all underclassmen in another era. They'd all be back. You'd be building on this defense. You could really see good things. But in this era, you bring people in over the top, or maybe you lose them to the transfer portal because someone else paid them. How much consistency is there on a young defense that should all be back getting better?
Yeah, I actually think that A&M's in a pretty good spot. You know, they had a decent amount of transfers last year, but if you look at their depth chart, it was a lot of guys that were probably buried on the 2nd and 3rd spot of their position and kind of saw the writing on the wall that they weren't really going to get an opportunity, and they went somewhere else to get that playing time. And so, yeah, I think that A&M is in a decent spot in terms of returning production, led by a guy like Torian York at linebacker. he's a great story, under-recruited kid that just works his tail off. He's not probably going to be the greatest linebacker in the pros, but he gets the job done at college, and he's a great team leader. And Hal's a guy that he was really kind of their third down package edge rusher last year, and so he really had that defined role. And then as time went on and those three guys declared for the draft, he kind of got his chance to shine in the bowl game against USC and really took advantage of it. And he's really transformed his body this offseason. I mean, the guy looks like a freak, and he's really trying to show it on the field this season too.
You talk about the offense last year. Marcel Reed is entrenched in quarterback. I know they brought up they got a Zeno kid to be the backup, and then they've got some redshirt freshmen behind him. But one of the things as I was researching for the team is that a concern was at receiver. And so they go ahead and they get Jonah Wilson out of Houston, and then they get Casey Concepcion out of, I think it was NC State. Now, here's a kid who had a massive season 2 years ago in 23 and statistically dropped off fairly significant in 24. But I assume they're counting on him because the team in NC State 2 years ago was better than it was last year, that they think that he can be a big-time receiver for them.
100%. That you nailed it on the dot. You're nailed it on the head. Words are hard, but you're absolutely right in the fact that receiver is a spot that A&M that was their number one spot on offense that they sought to upgrade this offseason, and I think that they have. I mean, time will tell, right? It's easy to say in spring, yeah, they look great. They're making these catches in practice. They did this in the spring game. Well, and then you get to October and you're thinking, man, we were so wrong in March. This is actually a big area of concern. But I really think that A&M will take a step forward at receiver. It's kind of hard not to after where they were last year. They really struggled at that position. Guys really struggled to get separation. They struggled to win 50-50 balls. And that's why A&M really overhauled that room. And a guy like Concepcion is one that they are really going to lean on. Another guy is Mario Craver, played at Mississippi State last year, and Mike Elko has said that if you go around the room and ask the A&M defensive backs that were there last year who the toughest receiver they had to guard last year was, they all pretty much agreed that it was Craver. He had a really strong freshman season at Mississippi State. He got hurt and didn't play down the stretch. Mississippi State's a struggling program, and A&M was able to get him out of the portal. And so those are kind of the two guys out of the transfer portal that they're really going to be leaning on. And then they've got a couple other guys that were freshmen last year, one in Terry Bussey, who was a five-star talent out of a really small town in Texas. He came in as a defensive back, and then in fall camp they moved him over to receiver when they realized they were fine at corner, but they really needed help at receiver. He just played from behind the whole season. It's hard for any freshman to jump in and get going at that kind of spot in the SEC. And so they're really hoping that this offseason will have allowed him to grow a lot and he will have a more impactful role on this offense. And then the fourth guy to really watch out for is a guy named Ashton Bethel-Roman. He's kind of a tall, lanky guy. He's starting to fill out, and he just makes really good plays. He made a really good grab in the spring game, and they're really high on him. The thing about A&M's receiving core, though, is that they've got a lot of the same build of guy. They don't necessarily have the really tall, imposing receiver. They had one of those in a guy named Noah Thomas who was 6'6", and he was probably the biggest surprise that transferred out of A&M last year, and he ended up at Georgia. Not a bad place to go. But, so it's going to be interesting how it shakes out. I like to think they're going to be better, but is the lack of diversity and skill set going to maybe be a hindrance for them? That's something that I'm curious about when we get to the fall.
Alex Miller joined us, Texas A&M beat writer for the Bryan-College Station Eagle. A year ago, Utah State had an interim coach. It was a crazy year, but I don't know how much we can take from it. But the one thing we do know watching their games is the defense was terrible and people ran all over them. And it was a long year if you were on the defensive side of the ball for the Aggies. Then I look at Texas A&M and Le'Veon Moss, Amari Daniels as kind of a two-headed monster running back with Marcel Reed at quarterback. Those three combined to run for like 2,000 yards and 25 touchdowns. And I guess we need to factor the O-line into this, but is A&M going to be capable of just running the ball right at the Aggies? That was a major problem. Maybe a new coaching staff will fix it, but they got to be Utah State fans worried about just getting run over by an SEC team.
Yeah, running the ball is definitely going to be a strength of A&M's offense. They return all of their offensive linemen, which is a huge plus at any school, but especially in the SEC when you've got an experienced offensive line. You don't win in the SEC if you don't have the guys in the trenches, right? Jimmys and Joes still matter. X's and O's are important, but in the SEC you got to have both to be successful. And A&M's got that on its offensive line. And you've got a good point that A&M has a really strong running back room. And a third guy to watch out for is a guy that was on the shelf last season because he broke his foot during fall camp scrimmage. His name is Reuben Owens, and he's the guy that took a lot of the reps this spring because Le'Veon Moss and Amari Daniels, they were recovering from their injuries last season. Moss tore his knee up, and I'm blanking on Daniels' injury off the top of my head, but he had surgery at the end of the season, missed the bowl game, and so I think they're hopeful that Daniels for sure will be ready by the start of the season, and they're probably hopeful that Moss will too. I would expect A&M's offense is going to be pretty vanilla against Utah State, considering they got their big non-conference game at Notre Dame the following week. But if you're going to go vanilla and you're running a Colin Klein offense, think old school Kansas State, Bill Snyder. They're going to run the ball and they're going to kind of mix and match some schemes in the run game that kind of throw some funky run plays at you. It's pretty cool to watch if you get an end zone cam. How he's able to really kind of shake things up in the run game. But, yeah, that's definitely what A&M hopes to be its bread and butter. We just talked about the questions at receiver. That helps when you have that run game. And, oh, by the way, you got a quarterback in Marcel Reed that can run and pull it at any time.
A couple of guys here locally play a football powerhouse, a receiver, Miles, and then they got a quarterback I think he still has another year of eligibility, and they've committed to Texas A&M. They want to go there, but what we hear, at least around the country, is Texas A&M has almost unlimited amounts of NIL. Just how big is that in terms of what they can offer guys?
Yeah. It is true. A&M is very well positioned in this new iteration of college sports to be among the leaders. A&M's got probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, alumni bases in the country, and there's a lot of successful Aggies out there, and that helps when you got folks that are committed and bought in and want to support a program and a school. A&M's always – even going back to the 80s, they hired Jackie Sherrill from Pittsburgh in 1982. He was the first $1 million head coach in college football. And so this has been a long-standing thing. Everybody likes to talk about Jimbo Fisher's contract, right? If you know one thing about Jimbo Fisher, he coached Jameis Winston. He won a championship at Florida State. And, he made $75 million at A&M, right? And so – A&M's got money, they've got deep pockets, and they've really started recruiting nationally beginning when Jimbo was head coach. And so it's not a surprise to see A&M go into a state like Utah and try and get some top talent. And, yeah, you talk about a guy like Jerome Miles. We talked about that, the receiving room. I know Jerome has dealt with a couple injuries in high school, but he is a guy that they're hoping can come in and find his spot in that receiver room. And I don't know if it's going to be this fall, but they have high hopes for a guy like him in the future. And we talked about how A&M's maybe got a lot of the same guys at receiver. Well, he's kind of the one that I think is going to be a little different in terms of his build and frame. And so that would really help if he was able to, even if it's a small impact this fall, have an impact on that offense and in that receiving room.
There was a time when we were following the Pac-12 very closely. Obviously, the University of Utah was in it. And we'd always talk about, the teams at the top, how good are they? But there's such parity, and they beat each other up. And basically, the rest of the country didn't want to hear that. They just thought the league was terrible. Are they singing a different song in the SEC after so many teams went 5-3 last year? I've lived in the West my whole life, so I'm not really prone to feeling bad for the SEC. But I do think they beat themselves up to a large degree. But nobody seemed to care when it was the Pac-12, and ex-Pac-12 teams went out and won the Big 12 and the Big 10 year one after the breakup, so those programs must not have been terrible. Maybe these ACC teams aren't terrible. They're just beating each other up. How do you think they're going to handle scheduling going forward? And how do you think they're going to handle this new reality where there's a lot of 5-3 and 6-2 teams?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I think that's part of the big conversation right now with where things are going with the college football playoff, right? If you follow the reporting from some of the national guys, the SEC and the Big Ten, they're pushing to get those automatic bids into the college football playoff. And whether that's right or wrong, that will dictate, I believe, the future of scheduling in the SEC. A lot of people like to knock the SEC that they only play 8 conference games, but you're right. If you have a team that is, 5-3, 9-3, they're on the cusp of getting into the college football playoff. If they got to play one more game and all of a sudden they got 4 losses, that really hurts your shot of making the playoff. And the SEC probably wants that guarantee that, okay, even if we play a meat grinder of a schedule, we have those guaranteed spots. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's a tricky deal. I like the fact that college football, anything can happen. I'm not sure if I personally like the whole breakaway scenario, but it is a point of discussion. I think the SEC needs to go to 9 games, but I personally don't think they're going to do it unless they have that guaranteed spots, because they know that if they play that extra game, if you look at A&M's schedule, say A&M goes 10-2 and they're in prime position to have a good seed in the college football playoff. Well, say you added a 9th game against, we'll say, Georgia, and they lose that can really knock you down the seed line and potentially knock you out of the playoff. And so I think that the SEC wants to avoid a scenario like that for its own sake, but it's going to be interesting to see how they come to a conclusion with some of those things, and truly how much power guys like Greg Sankey, the SEC commissioner, and Petitti, the Big Ten commissioner, have when it comes to making these really big and impactful changes on the national landscape.
Alex, we'll leave it right there. We appreciate the time. We agree with you. Words are hard, but you mastered most of them. So you know what? Give yourself a good grade and move on with the day, Alex.
Hey, thanks, guys. Great talking with you. Y'all have a great day.
All right, Alex Miller, Texas A&M beat writer for the Bryan-College Station Eagle.
Yeah, I've always said never get in the mud with a donkey.
Never get in the mud with a donkey. Nice. They need to add a 9th conference game, and then, Vanderbilt doesn't have to play Georgia State and lose to them. Oh, wait, bad example.
I agree. Whittingham's been calling for that for years.
Yep.
We need some uniformity. We've gone down too far down the road to turn back, and it needs to continue to go down the road and just be NFL light, because that's what it is. Get over any hang-up that you may have and get it done.
DJ and PK, it's 97.5 The Zone.